Hello, I'm Pastor Nanette Christofferson, and along with Pastor Steve Talmadge, we offer these short Bible studies on our lectionary readings. This week, we find ourselves in Epiphany 4. We have the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, 1 through 12. Many of you might be familiar with this chapter, or at least the title of this chapter, called the Sermon on the Mount, or oftentimes referred to also as the Beatitudes. If we look to Jesus' ministry in the past, in chapter 4, we see that Jesus is increasing in popularity. We see that he has started a ministry of healing, and he started calling his disciples as well. So as we take a look at the Beatitudes, I'd just like to share with you a picture from the place where it is believed where Jesus preached the Sermon on the Mount. And this is up near Tiberias, up near the Sea of Galilee is right before you. And then I have a picture as well, as they put a church as to around the place where Jesus may have given the sermon, and it's called the Church of the Beatitudes. And so there's a picture of it, and a picture from inside the church, Jesus giving the Beatitudes, or the Sermon on the Mount. So one of the things that Scripture's always asking us, or one of the things we might be asking of Scripture as well, is how do we know Jesus is an authoritative teacher? And this is what people were coming to see, because they knew that this person was different, and he spoke with such authority, so differently than many of the other rabbis. And so one of the things that may have been different about his teaching is that Jesus didn't seem to follow a particular rabbi. And many times there were rabbis that had trained other rabbis, right? But this is where we see later on in the Gospel of John, the authorities always wanted to know who gives him this authority. And then when he would say that it comes from God, they would call him blasphemous, right? But here are some things that kind of help us answer this question of Jesus as an authoritative teacher. So in Matthew chapter 5, verse 1, Jesus goes up the mountain with his disciples. We get our first glimpse of Jesus as an authoritative teacher. We know that Jesus is a teacher and a healer because the Sermon on the Mount follows a summary statement of Jesus' activity. Jesus went throughout Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. Matthew here shows Jesus to be an active agent of God's power among the people and an authoritative teacher, highlighted by what is arguably the most famous of Jesus' teachings, the Sermon on the Mount. So let's take a look at this sermon and take a look at the Beatitudes, kind of refresh our memories of what Jesus says here. For in Matthew's Gospel, this is really Jesus laying out his mission statement of what he has come to do, or pointing out to us that the kingdom of heaven is near. When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." So Jillian Engelhardt writes this in her commentary from workingpreacher.org. She writes, "The Beatitudes, in my mind, serve as sort of a preamble for the way in which Jesus will interpret the law and how he will conduct his ministry. So far in Matthew, Jesus has prepared for his ministry. He has been baptized. He has been tempted by Satan. He has called his first 4 disciples. He has taught synagogues and proclaimed the good news and cured diseases and sicknesses. Now he turns to teaching his disciples, the first time they are called such in the gospel. Presumably only the 4 that have been called so far, Andrew, Simon Peter, John, and James. The crowds then serve as a sort of backdrop to the sermon. They aren't the direct audience of the sermon, but they are presumably the recipients of the divine favor Jesus says God has in store. Now, it's easy from our pews in the wealthiest country in the world to read the Beatitudes and overlook the embodiment present in them. So let's take some time to look at each Beatitude. And I put in here a link, and I'm pretty sure you can click on it when you have this video. And these are links from The Chosen, and they have one scene that's 3 minutes of Jesus talking about the Sermon on the Mount, and then the actual Jesus giving the Sermon on the Mount as well. And sometimes this helps put things in perspective for people and gives it a real view of what it may have been like. And for some, that might be helpful. So please feel free, or you can look up the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7, and put The Chosen and look it up on YouTube, and you'll find that exact scene as well. Jesus starts off by saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." So how do you understand this statement, "Blessed are the poor in spirit"? Some read that the poor in spirit as those who lack, who are materially bereft, and therefore worn down by the plight of poverty. They are those whom society has left behind, who break their backs to make ends meet, whose struggle for basic survival crushes their spirits. Jesus says theirs is the kingdom of heaven, for there will be no poor in spirit in heaven. God will set things right. Blessed are those who mourn. Grief comes for all of us, but mortality rates were higher in the ancient world. Parents simply could not expect their children to survive infancy, let alone make it to adulthood. It was not a given. War, food, and housing insecurity, as well as infectious diseases, could cut a life short. And yes, it is right to grieve the loss of one's land. Jesus' audience was living under imperial occupation, and the audience of the gospel, encountering the story after Rome's destruction of Jerusalem and the temple in 70 CE, were certainly grieved by the violation of their land and sacred space. The promised land was occupied, yet to those who mourn, Jesus proclaims a coming comfort. Blessed are the meek. This is in reference to Psalm 37, verse 11. Here, meek refers to those who are abused by the wicked who seem only to prosper. God reassures the meek that they will inherit the land. Jesus likewise tells the disciples that those who are abused by the wicked will inherit the earth, a land currently claimed and exploited by Rome for the benefit of a few. God's rule will reverse this. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Righteousness in the Hebrew Bible, for example, in Isaiah 51, refers to a total societal restructuring that includes the equitable distribution of resources. Those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, then, are those that Rome's unjust distribution keeps at the margins of subsistence. In a reimagined society, all will have enough. And Jesus says that in God's kingdom, these folks will be filled. Blessed are the merciful. Jesus says that those who practice mercy, those who give of their resources and care for the outcast, will receive mercy. Rome was not known for showing mercy. Rome violently expanded its rule and heavily taxed its population to the point of food insecurity. God's rule is different. In God's kingdom, all will be welcome and will have plenty. Blessed are the pure in heart. The pure in heart are those who follow the will of God in their thinking and doing. Jesus will parse out the importance of a person's heart in discipleship later in his sermon in 5:27-30. For those that commit to God thoroughly, without hypocrisy, will see God, an image of intimate, face-to-face encounter with God. Blessed are the peacemakers. This one is particularly interesting as Rome claimed to be the bearers of peace, but Rome's peace not only comes through domination. In Matthew, peace is not the absence of conflict. Jesus is well aware that his message will cause division. However, no one is ever coerced or forced into becoming a disciple. Rome subjugated people to their rule through threat and violence. Entry into God's kingdom is voluntary. Peacemakers enact not the empire's will, but God's merciful reign, living toward this wholeness and well-being and against any power that hinders or resists it. So what does it mean that the Beatitudes are rooted in embodiment? For those of us living comfortable lives in the wealthiest nation the world has ever known, how can we embody the Beatitudes? How can we pursue justice, righteousness, and peace? How can we embody God's promises to those that are poor, mourn, and oppressed, when the Beatitudes are rooted in embodiment rather than spiritualized? We can more clearly see the ways we could act to bring God's kingdom into people's lives. Blessed are those who are persecuted for justice's sake. Finally, Jesus said, blessed are those who are persecuted for justice's sake. When people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account, the life of a disciple of Jesus runs counter to the values of the world. Perhaps we don't experience persecution in our modern context in the way that early Jesus' followers did. No one is looking to kill us simply because we confess Christ. But do not be deceived. When we live a life for justice, for the oppressed and the marginalized, when we extend mercy to the outcast, when we live the values outlined in the Beatitudes, the rulers of this world will resist us. So just a few questions to help you think. So the question is, what do you think? Can the Beatitudes serve as a roadmap for recognizing the nearness of the reign of God? And I believe they absolutely can. When we think about meek, when we think about blessed are those who mourn, we often look at these words as words that are just awful words. And yet, God is with us in the meekness and in the mourning and in all of the different experiences we have. And many times we can see how God is near, even in our most tragic events that happen to us in our lives. So, where have you seen similar signs of the nearness of God's reign in these last days? I believe I see similar of the nearness of God's reign in preschoolers when I talk with them. And having just come back from Egypt, I hadn't seen them for a while, and they were just so sweet and so much fun to talk with. But when they think about some of the questions I ask them in Godly Play, you can see their minds working, and you can see God's reign around them and surround them. I see God's reign every time I see kindness being offered to someone. I see God's reign every time I see someone walking alongside someone and not thinking about themselves, but walking along others who might be a minority and walking alongside them for justice. And then the next one is, if you can hone your eyes and ears and heart to recognize it, where might you encounter God's reign in the days to come? And my answer would be probably in the least likely places, because so often we look for God in maybe a glory sign, but many times God is there amongst the weak, amongst those on the margins, amongst those whom we wouldn't really consider being around. So I pray that this week, that your eyes, ears, and heart might recognize where the reign of God is. And we know it's all around us, but what is God calling you to see and to hear and to recognize? Well, I wish you blessings on your journey this week as you think about the Beatitudes and Jesus' Sermon on the Mount.